o'clock, so I think if that's all right, we will kick off. So welcome everybody. I think we have everybody. Is there someone we're expecting at the moment?
I don't think we've got a representative from Thurrock Council. We haven't received apologies, but as you say, we call it, so we might want to press ahead.
Thank you very much. So welcome all, and I'd like to welcome particularly Chris Brodie, who is chair of the CELEP Strategic Board, as you know. So Chris has been invited to the Accountability Board at the recommendation of the Strategic Board, because the Strategic Board felt it would be really helpful for Chris as CELEP chair to attend and to have visibility over the programme and particularly the high risk projects. Especially given the assurances that Chris and the board, the Strategic Board, have provided to government that the Local Growth Fund will be fully committed by the 31st of March 2021. So in terms of procedure, Chris will be able to contribute to discussion, but as per usual, only local authority members will vote on decisions. So just to be clear about that. So if possible, if you could all introduce yourselves, I'll go round as per previously, because it's good for the public to be able to know who you are. So I'll go round. Councillor Chambers, please.
Rodney Chambers, Medway Council.
Thank you. Councillor Glazer.
Keith Glazer. Oh, sorry, I'm muted.
No, you're not. You're fine.
Sorry, Councillor Keith Glazer, leader of East Sussex County Council.
Thank you. Councillor Woodley.
Councillor Woodley, Deputy Leader of Southend-on-Sea Borough Council.
Councillor Finch has disappeared. Councillor Goff.
Roger Goff, Leader, Kent County Council.
Simon.
Simon Cook, Principal, Chief Executive of Mid-Kent College.
Rosemary.
Rosemary Nunn, Commercialisation Innovation, University of Greenwich.
We also have Councillor Gledhill on the line now as well too.
Okay, Councillor Gledhill, who is on mute at the moment.
Councillor Gledhill, Leader of Thurrock Council.
Thank you. And Councillor Finch was here. You can see the amazing Northern Lights. So that's where he will reappear from the Northern Lights, I'm sure, in a moment. So thank you all. If I could just remind you of the normal rules of engagement apply. So if you're not speaking, please could you put your microphones on mute? And if you could indicate that you wish to speak by either raising your hand so I can see it, or raising your hand virtually on the chat, the chat function. And in terms of voting, if you could please raise your hands physically, and I will just go around and check that I can see everybody's hand if you're voting in favour. And obviously just to remind you that members of the public can join the meeting and officers are listening to the discussion. And I understand that actually if you have queries, there are some officers on standby to answer some of those queries on particular projects. I'm proposing that we move item 7 due to the confidentiality in that item towards the end of the agenda, so after item 16. If Suzanne, could you outline the process on that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we will move into confidential session, which will be all the board members, the chair, and as in the past, the supporting officers of the 6 upper tiers and federated officers have been allowed to remain. Are board content that we follow that process again this time?
Yes.
Yep. Lovely. So all those people will be able to stay. If you are a panelist, we will put you onto hold. For the attendees who are not one of the supporting officers, we will ask you to leave the meeting at that point. If you can leave, and then you will need to give us a couple of minutes and then go back using your registration link, and you will be in a waiting room, and I will let you back in when the decision is to be made. So please keep hold of your registration links, we will go through that when we hit that item.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Councillor Goff had a question, I think.
Yeah, sorry, could I just clarify? So we're saying that we would go into closed session at item 7.
Yeah.
Now, so the fact that item 6 has some exempt items under, with the Appendix A, that doesn't affect that.
The intention for those items that have exempt appendices was that we just wouldn't discuss the contents of the appendices.
That's fine.
Unless we feel that, if board members think that they need to discuss the detail that's in those appendices, then we'll go into confidential session then.
That's fine. Part of my reason for asking was that I believe there may well be an officer, Simon Thomas of Canterbury City Council, who will, I think, be in attendance on this meeting, and I might ask Simon to provide some information that may be helpful for the board. And clearly, if that's in the open session, we're fine for that. Yeah.
Yeah, is that okay, Ree?
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be fine, yeah.
Is that okay? Good. Thank you.
Okay, Sarah.
Yeah, that's fine by me. I suppose the criteria is that as long as it's not discussing anything that's in the confidential appendices is the key. So yeah, absolutely. Great. So yes, we will, and because it's a long meeting as well, I'm also proposing that we have a short break, so we can all just refill our cups of tea or whatever. So we will look to that. Hopefully it will. I think it's in the agenda pack when we're planning to do it. But I am trying to be relatively flexible about that, depending on how things run. So if everybody's happy with that, we'll move on to item 2, which is the minutes of the last meeting. So is everybody happy to confirm those as a correct record of the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of October 2020?
Great.
Thank you. Thank you. And then item 3, if I could ask for any declarations of interest to be made by members in accordance with the Members' Code of Conduct, please. Ron, Councillor Woodley. You're on mute.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put my hand up.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chambers.
I'm a trustee of the Historic Dockyard Chatham, and the fitting rigging house, which has benefited from the Growing Places Fund. I will declare a non-pecuniary interest and will not vote if there was any vote appertaining to the fitting rigging house, which I don't believe there is, but I thought I'd make that declaration.
Thank you, Councillor Chambers. Okay, can't see anybody else raising their hands, so I will take that there are no other declarations of interest. So on item 4, we haven't received any public questions. So let's move straight on to item 5, which is the capital programme update. And before I hand over to Rhiannon on this, I just want to note that there is currently 78.24 million LGF spend forecast beyond the growth deal at the moment. And we absolutely need to have confidence that these projects can be delivered. Otherwise, as we've discussed previously, there is a severe reputational risk for SELEP. So Rhiannon, can I hand over to you, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So yeah, as you said, Chair, there's quite a substantial change in the amount of forecast spend, particularly during this financial year, which increases the pressure into next financial year. So actually, since the planned spend was agreed at the beginning of the financial year, we've seen a reduction of £39 million in the forecast spend for this year. So from 128.8 million down to just over £89 million. So a substantial slippage there that we're showing, which isn't completely unsurprising given the impact of COVID, but does substantially increase the pressure beyond the programme. And there is, as you've said, that reputational risk around now forecasting £78 million beyond this financial year. Just as a reminder, the proposal here is any Department of Transport retained scheme funding will be carried forward by the accountable body. But any of the funding which we've received from Ministry of Housing, Communities, Local Government, so that's a majority of the funding, approximately £58 million. That the proposal there is to implement an option 4 capital swap. So the proposal is at the end of this financial year, we will transfer that funding over to the local authorities for investment across their own local capital programmes. And then in subsequent years, the local authorities themselves will fund the delivery of those projects. Government are fully aware of that option, and it's previously been supported by this board and the strategic board. However, we do need to make sure we're only implementing the option where we've got real assurance over the future delivery of these projects. So in February, there'll be a detailed conversation about where we see it as appropriate to use the option. We'll have concerns, particularly where there are issues around planning or match contributions have not been confirmed. So if there's a risk to the total funding package for a project, that is a big concern around the future delivery of the project. And therefore, we would want to have a conversation with this board to understand, are we kind of willing to accept that risk and transfer the funding, or should it be reallocated to a different project on the pipeline? The main issue there is, if we transfer the funding and it's then not delivered, we've provided a commitment to government that the projects will proceed, that the funding is fully committed. So really just a reputational risk there, a quite substantial reputational risk. If we're spending £78 million beyond the growth deal period, but we need to make sure that that is absolutely spent and those projects are delivered. So there'll be a very detailed conversation about these high-risk projects in February. But again, through this meeting, we're really encouraging the board members to consider the risks and take early decisions where we can to reallocate funding, where we see that there could be substantial risks to projects proceeding. There will be a conversation at the strategic board meeting next month as well around the pipeline. So currently we've got £6.7 million funding unallocated. So the process will be, or the pipeline will be agreed next month to where that funding will be allocated. And obviously any additional funding that's identified through this meeting, if it becomes unallocated, that will also follow the same process in that a pipeline will be developed, and then that funding can then come forward to this board for approval. I think those were the only comments I was going to make, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Simon.
Thanks, Sarah. I've got a couple of questions, and I guess these are less perhaps directly to the proposals we've got to consider today, but something maybe a bit more broad, and we'll probably pick up on it later on in other things. Have we got something, Rhiannon, that gives you as the person that's leading on some of this an idea that underspend is going to get bigger or smaller? And I know that's a judgment call as opposed to anything evidential, but it feels to me that it just keeps creeping and getting bigger and bigger, and that's going to create a slightly larger, more embarrassing problem for us to have to deal with.
Yeah. Thanks, Simon. Yes, I fully agree. If we're already at £78 million spent beyond the growth deal period, I think that figure is only likely to increase. Previous years of the programme, we've seen substantial slippage at the end. So Q4, we've seen quite a lot of movement between that and future years. So yes, there is a risk there that this figure could only increase. The exercise, obviously, to identify the projects through the LGF pipeline and reallocate that funding is obviously the mitigation we're putting in place there to try and encourage that spend. But again, there is a risk of how quickly we can get that funding out and spent. So okay. Yeah, there is a risk.
Forgive me if I can just follow that up then, please. Just to forgive the educationalist in me, I'm already switching to lessons learned or anything that might help us in the future as opposed to today with any decision making. But I would find it really helpful if we were able to provide a summary of the projects so far under LGF that have either not succeeded or failed or been withdrawn, and the reasons for that and the cost associated to that, and also what we've learned from those. One of the other parts to that I think is quite helpful is that I often hear that there are we often hear about lots of other agencies involved, and those other agencies then having an impact. And it would be useful also to see whether or not of those projects there's a consistent theme. We hear a lot about highways in England, but I'd like to know whether or not that is the case from all of those projects, really. It would just be useful to see that in a chart from those projects that have been withdrawn or failed, and why, and what we might be able to learn from it in the future around risk.
Thank you, Simon. Sorry, I noticed Suzanne had got her hand up. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say that on the activity list for next year, one of our key activities is the close down of the LGF programme, including a large piece of work around lessons learned, and yeah, we'll most definitely make sure that we're including those elements as well.
But I would suspect we'll see a similar trend under GBF and GPF. We'll see that is always a really difficult balance for us. But I'm almost thinking there might then be some evidence if we then have to go back to government with cap in hand and say, I'm really sorry we haven't spent it. Maybe we've got a little bit more evidence that's consistent across that rather than just individual circumstance, opinion and experience.
Thank you. Very good point. Thank you. Councillor Woodley, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think it's an unfair question to ask of Rhiannon, actually. It should be down to the individual councillors on this meeting. All I can say at the moment, I think we've put a hand up to the 6 million on the form 2, which is there for reallocation. And we're going to have probably a small slippage of 1 million on the Southend Central Area Action Plan, but that would only be a month at the most, probably to the end of April rather than the end of March. And I think we've given the leeway to the end of September, but so I don't see any more slippages in Southend, but I think it's up to us as councillors to put our hands up and say yes or no and go for that. And I think, yeah, right question, Simon, but probably to the wrong person.
Thank you, Councillor Woodley. Does anybody else have any questions or comments at this stage? I can't see any. So I go to decision, which is, that we agree the updated total planned LGF spend in 2020-21 of 69.236 million, excluding the Department for Transport retained schemes, and increasing to 89.301 including DFT retained schemes as set out in Table 1 and Appendix A. Do we agree this? Can I see your hands? Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, couldn't see you. Note the deliverability and risk assessment as set out in Appendix B. And note the mitigation action required in relation to high risk projects as set out in Appendix C. Thank you. Okay, thanks very much. Let's move on now to item 6, which is the A28 Surrey Link Road. I think I'm going to hand over to you on this one.
Yeah, thank you. So we've discussed this project at a number of meetings over the last year. The funding, £5.9 million, was awarded in June 2016 to this project. The previous recommendations to this board have considered the issues around planning for the link road itself, and also the developments that are due to financially contribute to the project. So whilst Kent County Council was taking forward a particular section of the project, the remaining section of the link road was due to be delivered by developers, and they're also due to provide financial contributions to the Kent County Council section of the link road as well. Unfortunately, we've heard in the last week that actually the plan application for the developments that are due to financially contribute to the project have not been successful, and they were due to provide the lion's share of their funding towards the delivery of the project. So obviously it's disappointing news for the project. Within the report itself, we had set out 2 options to the board. One of those, option 2, did plan for a scenario where planning was not secured. And in that instance, we're recommending to the board that actually the 4.79 million that has been not spent yet on the project, that funding is reallocated. The unspent funding is reallocated on that project. There's another conversation around the 1.1 million that's been spent to date on the project. So previously we were under the impression that if planning had been successful, even if the local growth fund contribution wasn't able to continue supporting the project, actually developers would proceed with the delivery of the scheme, so that £1.1 million would remain a capital cost and could remain as local growth funds. In light of the fact that the development has not been successful in securing planning, I think we need some further conversations with Kent County Council just to understand how they're going to account for that remaining 1.1 million that's allocated, that's been spent to date, to fully understand if that's still a capital cost against the project or if that now becomes a revenue abortive cost. But the recommendations to the board are that actually the 4.7 million is reallocated, that we agree that the 1.1 million pounds remains allocated to the project if it can be demonstrated that it remains a capital cost. But in the meantime, over the next few months, we'll look for those assurances from Kent County Council that that does in fact remain a capital cost. If that's not, we'll bring another update back to the board to suggest that that would then become a revenue abortive cost and need to be recovered. For a high level introduction, I know Councillor Goff's got more information, so I'll pass over.
Thank you, Councillor Goff.
Thank you. And firstly, the situation certainly is as Rhiannon said. Just to clarify, the picture was always that there were planning applications that were coming to Canterbury City Council's planning committee this week, which relate to the underlying housing developments. And as Rhiannon said, that links in very directly to the developer funding of significant elements of all this. That would have been followed by a Kent County Council Planning Applications Committee meeting in a week or two's time that would have been addressing the actual road itself. I would nonetheless ask that we do not at this moment reallocate the 4.791 million. I appreciate that the situation is now one where we've not had the planning approval that was anticipated and hoped for. Nonetheless, there may be other options to be pursued. And I'm not quite sure, in a sense, I would say that whilst the uncertainties over this project are very, very significant, fully accept that, the same may well go for a number of other projects which we to discuss in the course of today. And they are being accorded the opportunity to be considered through till February. I'm not entirely sure why this one has a different, I mean, I know we've discussed it before, so I sort of plead guilty to that, but nonetheless, it has a different drop dead date on it, if you like, to the others. And I'm not sure in principle why that should necessarily be the case. The other reason for arguing that is I think this board and CELEP in general is always rightly concerned with good and balanced growth. The likelihood is that if this process were nonetheless to continue, if there were an appeal, which I think is most likely that there will be, were that appeal to be successful, then many elements of the project would still go ahead. And indeed, we've talked about this before. But you would, in the absence of the CELEP funding, you would see various parts of this potentially in relation to areas such as affordable housing, potentially education or other contributions bearing the strain. And indeed also, of course, Kent County Council itself would be taking additional financial commitment and probably financial risk on it under those circumstances. So I would urge that we still give this, as I said, the same opportunity as a number of the other projects, whilst recognising that we have had a very serious setback. I believe, incidentally, Simon Thomas, the head of planning at Canterbury City Council, is with us. And if he is, I wonder if it would be possible, Chair, through you, to ask if he's able to provide any further update on matters.
Yes, that's fine. Suzanne, I can see him just appear. Thank you. Simon.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me in. Yes, we did have a setback at the planning committee meeting the night. The planning application was refused on some detailed matters. The committee didn't refuse the principle of development. It is a key site within our current local plan that delivers a piece of highway infrastructure that unlocks around 6,000 to 8,000 houses within the district. So it is recognised by the council in our local plan as a key piece of infrastructure. The committee's concerns were quite detailed concerns, and we do intend to work very closely with the committee to try and overcome those concerns. There is a possibility that if we do that, then if we overcome the concerns of the committee, then we'll be encouraging the applicant to reapply and very quickly make hopefully a more positive decision on the application. Failing that, then the applicant does have the right of appeal, and I would very clearly advise the planning committee that in my view the reasons given would be very difficult for the council to defend on appeal. So it is a setback. This still does remain an absolutely crucial piece of infrastructure for the council in delivering its local plan.
Thank you, Simon. Can I ask a question? I'm sure other people will have questions, but I just wanted to ask a quick one, which is about the timescale, because if it needs to go back to planning, what's the reconsidered timescale on this?
I think the applicant is prepared to reapply. Obviously, what they'll want is some comfort from me, particularly that that some of their detailed concerns can be overcome, and I'm confident that I can do that. If they reapply, they would do that more or less immediately. And because the application has already been through the process, a report has been written, then it will be very, very simple for us to get the report back onto a committee meeting within, once the consultation period has expired. So I would say February would be the date we'd be aiming for an application to be resubmitted, reconsidered by the planning committee if it's submitted within the next week or so.
Thank you, Councillor Chambers.
Yeah, I just I'd like to get confirmation on process. I take it, therefore, it was a committee decision to refuse consent against an officer's recommendation. I only ask that because if it was against an officer's recommendation, then the applicant, taking into consideration the committee's objections, is likely to be more successful on appeal. But the problems with appeals at the moment, particularly on an application of this size, will probably be a long time in the future. So can I ask if, in fact, if we defer this and it is for, say, February, is there any guarantee that the application will come back to the committee with the considerations in that new revised application, taking into consideration the committee's reasons for refusal? And if that is the case, how much does the planning officer put on the likelihood of it actually getting through at that particular meeting?
Yes, the answer to the first question is yes. The officer recommendation was very strongly for the approval of the planning application, not least because of the strategic importance of the site, and in our view, all of the detail had been adequately dealt with. The planning committee rejected that that recommendation. So, as you quite rightly say, and as I quite clearly explained to the planning committee, I think the chances of success on appeal for refusal in maintaining that position are very slight, because the reasons, in my view, were not sufficient planning reasons. So that's the advice I gave committee. Despite that, that they maintain their concerns. So there are two possible routes now. The first one is that that I can work with the planning committee members to assure them that that detail can be resolved, and then the applicant reapplies within the next week or so, with that application then being reported again for approval at the committee meeting in February. If I'm unable to persuade the members that we can deal with the concerns, and which I'm confident I can, but if that were not the case, then the other option available to the applicant is to appeal. At the moment, we're seeing appeal inquiries being arranged within around 5 to 6 months of the appeal being made.
That was my fear.
Yeah, but I think the first approach from our point of view is, from our perspective, is to deal with the issues head on that have been raised by the committee, and invite the applicant to resubmit within the timescale being February.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Rhiannon.
Thank you, Chair. I think in the report, I just wanted to highlight the additional risk around the financial contributions to the project. So I think whilst we've got to go through the process potentially of really visiting the planning decision, actually what we really need by the end of this financial year is the confirmation from Kent County Council that all the contributions are in place to enable the project to be delivered. So I'm just conscious of those time pressures. Even if the plan application were able to be considered in February, within a month, we would need that full confirmation from Kent County Council that the Section 106 contributions were agreed, that Kent County Council itself was fully committed to the project and had the funding in place to proceed and be delivered. I think there's just a real risk there. If we leave it very much the last minute in February, March time, there wouldn't therefore be the opportunity to reallocate this funding and demonstrate it as spent. So I want to highlight that risk there, because obviously we do really need to be able to report back to government we fully spent and committed the funding during this financial year. Just to explain as well, I know Councillor Gough mentioned, I guess, what could be perceived as inconsistencies between the deadlines we've stated for plan applications for various projects. I suppose it really comes down to the timing of when funding was awarded by this board for certain projects. So some of them have come through much later through the LGF 3B and those sorts of rounds of funding, whereas this one was very much approved June 2016. So we've also had various updates on the projects in the last year. I think last February, there was an initial recommendation to reallocate the funding. So there has been that kind of continuous pressure on this project, and that's why there was a much stricter deadline set on this project, because the kind of ongoing issues, but also those issues around not just the planning, but needing those funding contributions fully secured before the end of the financial year.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Simon, I know you wanted to come in, and then I've met Councillor Glazier. Do you have your hand up? I'll bring you in a minute. So Simon first.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a couple of points. The first one is the Section 106 is complete now. Our intention was that after Tuesday, anticipating a successful meeting where the decision was to approve, we were intending to issue the decision on Wednesday, because the 106 agreement has been agreed both by the City Council and by the County Council. One other point just to clarify is that the application that was refused is for part of the site, the part where the relief road would be located. But we had also had an application on the agenda for the other part of the site, which we withdrew at the time because of the refusal on the southern part. So we still have an application that we can report back to committee within a very short time scale, if we can overcome the detailed reasons refused by the planning committee. So the timescales in terms of determination will be current application for part of the site. We could return to committee very, very quickly within weeks. And then the February date would be for the reapplication for the southern part of the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Glazier.
Thank you. Following on from that and the previous conversation, I mean, from my perspective, there are two key parts to it. The first is if it goes beyond the negotiations that are likely to happen shortly and the resubmission of this application, i.e. going into an appeal situation. I don't think there's a hope in hell. Oh, sorry, I don't think there's a really a clear timescale that this could be delivered. I think the last point about the fact that 106 has been agreed is really helpful, but equally, we're talking of a 12-week delay here. I just asked Rhiannon, realistically, would a 12-week delay by the time we take the next project that has an opportunity and move it forward really make a difference in the final outcome? I'm minded to say that that with a project as big as this, that that it does warrant that, if you like, that last gasp opportunity. But Rhiannon, if you could help with that.
Yeah, so the next meeting of the board, so is the 12th of February. So I think at that meeting, we would very clearly need to agree whether the project is going to proceed or not, to then enable on the 12th of March to enable the reallocation of funding to an alternative project. So it will be absolutely cutting it, well, very fine, particularly that meeting being the 12th of March. We then have to put agreements in place to be able to transfer it to alternative new projects within just a few weeks. So it is getting exceptionally tight. You know, however, you know, if Kent County Council feel that on the 12th of February, we can come back with a firm report that confirms the contributions, confirms the funding model, I think, you know, we've obviously worked those timescales. So yeah, there is a pressure on those deadlines. So I think, yeah, just in February, we'd want that firm confirmation of the planning and the financial contributions and the model that can be used to fund the project.
Thank you. Councillor Goff.
Thank you, and I'm grateful for the comments a number of people have made. And I do take the point that with this is being run now exceptionally tight, this is not, nonetheless, as I said, the only project of which that is true. And I do take Rhiannon's point that this has been with us for a while. Nonetheless, it still finds itself, in a sense, in the same position as a number of others. As Simon indicated, I think if we can overcome the planning issues, and we will know the likelihood of that very, very quickly, then I think many of the other sort of building blocks fall into place pretty straightforwardly. I think the concern I would have otherwise is that we are at this moment making that decision when there may still be the option to bring this forward. And therefore, I think it would be good, for the reasons that Keith, among others, mentioned, simply to give it that little bit of extra option. I do agree, incidentally, and just to be entirely clear, there's a big distinction on this between the application being resubmitted along the lines that Simon mentioned and an appeal. Because if we're into an appeal, then it is many, many months indeed. And I think at that point, we would truly have run out of road. But I think the route that Simon described does still give us this option.
Thank you. Councillor Finch, and then, sorry, Rhiannon, did you want to come in first?
Sorry, just a suggestion. Perhaps if we're going down the routes, we could have an update to the strategic board next month, just about the progress, to make sure the planning has been, going through the right steps to be considered in February, just so the board's got that information when they're discussing the pipeline. The other point there was just around, obviously, the Kent County Council planning for the project itself will need to be considered. So if the contributions, if they're planning for the developments are being considered in February, there'll then be a lag before the Kent County Council planning for the project itself can be approved. So just want to flag that as well. But yeah, an update in December would be helpful.
Chairman, sorry, what I was going to say was that I'm supportive of this project continuing. And I think we shouldn't forget the financial benefits from this project, albeit it might be slightly delayed, versus other projects where you may decide to do a swap for. And so I think we need to consider, when we come to the 12th of February, the financial benefits of this particular project and the risk involved in terms of further delays. But I think it is worth bearing in mind that adherence to government's timelines and benchmarks is obviously important, but equally well is the point that spending money wisely and getting a return on that money, which I think this project does, is of benefit to the community in the area and a benefit to Kent County Council as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Finch. Councillor Goff, did you want to come in again? I saw.
No, I think I'd indicated, but I think points have been covered.
Thank you. Were there any other hands, queries at all? Councillor Woodley.
Two computers on the go here and I'm pressing the wrong mouse. I take on board everything that's been said, and I do really want to offer support to Councillor Goff, Roger. There is one thing, if it does go a little bit different from what is planned, could not this be, looking at the time scale, it goes on to 23, 24 in terms of the whole programme, and 24, 25 onwards. Could this not be one of the first projects that we fund next time round in the next tranche of money coming forward, so that it doesn't stop this project? The funding can still come through, but at the same time, it gives an opportunity for the existing funding to be used elsewhere if we have to.
Rhiannon, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, there will be a big risk there. Obviously, we're hoping to have more positive news around things like the Shared Prosperity Fund, and before we've got that confirmation, I can see the merit in following that approach. And ideally, if we had that sight of the future funding streams, I think we'd absolutely, be recommending that approach to the board. Without that confirmation, yeah, it becomes much more difficult. Obviously, we need the strategic board to support any applications for future funding as well. So, there'll be a process point there as well.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Gledhill's put a comment about whether we are continually freezing. I'm not freezing on my machine. I don't know whether anybody else is. I think it may be, unfortunately, Councillor Gledhill's computer or connection. So just to clarify that. So, Rhiannon, I'm looking to you towards rewording the decisions, proposed decisions, please.
Yeah, perhaps a recommendation that agrees to extend the deadline to the 12th of February 2021, planning consent to be secured for the two developments that are due to financially contribute to the project. I think we also need to recognise the planning for the project itself. I'm conscious if we put a deadline of February, I don't think that's realistic from the information I've heard. So perhaps we just need to acknowledge there that the planning will also need to be in place for the project itself by the following meeting on the 12th of March, because otherwise I just don't think that 12th February deadline would be realistic. However, I'd suggest that we also note that an update comes back to the strategic board on the 11th of December, so we can sort of check progress and have an idea about if the project's not able to proceed and meet these deadlines, that we can identify other projects to come forward instead. And also to just note the need for the funding package to be fully confirmed by Kent County Council in order for us to transfer funding by the end of financial year. So if you're, does that sound reasonable?
Councillor Goff.
If I may say so, I think that sounds very reasonable. I'm very grateful for Rhiannon and indeed colleagues in supporting that. And I think, yes, we will clearly, there are a number of things we need to sort outside here, including the interaction, as Rhiannon mentioned, between what may happen in Canterbury City Council's planning process and Kent County Council's planning process. So I do think also on that basis, an update to the strategic board is actually imperative. Makes an enormous amount of sense.
Absolutely, thank you. And I presume, Simon, that you know the dates of planning committees already for next year. So how does that fit with our dates as well?
What we tend to do with the strategic sites is arrange meetings as necessary. So we have the flexibility to arrange a meeting at very short notice.
Great. Okay, thank you. So you'll be fully informed of our meeting dates, so that hopefully we can make the synergies all work. So Rhiannon, sorry to put you on the spot, but if you could possibly give us the wording for the decisions to be voted on, please.
Yeah, if I suggest that we agree to extend the deadline to the 12th of February 2021 for planning consent to be secured for the two developers that are due to contribute to the project as the first recommendation. I don't know if you want to take a vote on that one.
Yes, thank you. Okay, could we go to vote on that one, please? I need to see your hands if you're in favour. Councillor Chambers. We're just voting. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
If we then also agree a deadline for the planning consent to be in place for the project itself by no later than the 12th of March 2021.
Okay, thank you. I need to see your hands on that one as well, please. Thank you.
And then 2 points to note. Note that an update will come to the strategic board on the 11th of December, and also to note that the requirements around the full funding package need to be in place before the end of the financial year. I think we've already agreed those points, but so it's just to note.
Yeah, just to note those. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you, Simon and Rhiannon, particularly for all your work in the middle of the meeting on this. Really very much appreciated. Okay, right, thank you. Now, as I said, item 7, we are going to move to the end, towards the end of the meeting, as it's got confidential information in it. So we're going to move now to item 8, which is the M11 Junction 8, please. Howard.
Thank you, Chair. And if I could just say that I'm hopefully going to introduce Gary McDonnell from Essex County Council, who will be here as sort of holding my hand if there's any questions afterwards. We'll see what happens. Anyway, the M11 Junction 8, this report is for the Accountability Board to receive an update on the delivery of this project. The project originally received £2.734 million of LGF in November 2017. And in September of 2020, the board were updated on the project and are made aware of issues relating to the funding package. So another update is being brought forward to you today. It was outlined that the project now had a funding gap of £7 million due to increased tender costs and a possible reduction of other funding sources. To date, £2.239 million of LGF has been spent on the project, leaving £495,000 unspent. The scheme promoter is looking at ways of reducing the overall project cost and also raising the financial contributions to the project, and these are laid out in the report. Currently, the funding gap stands at approximately £6.029 million. A bid has also been put forward to Success Essex for an additional £1 million of LGF as part of the additional LGF programme. It will be noted that any project seeking additional LGF from this pot will have to evidence that the benefit cost ratio still presents high value for money. It is proposed that the remaining funding gap is met through Essex County Council's own capital programme, and this is currently being considered through Essex County Council's internal governance processes. SELET must be in a position to demonstrate to government that the funding is contractually committed and can be spent by the end of 2021. As such, it is recommended that written confirmation must be provided by Essex County Council by the next meeting of the board to confirm that funding package is in place. That's all I was going to say.
Thank you, Howard. Councillor Finch.
Chairman, just to help in terms of this process, I see no problem in us being able to meet the commitment that Howard has stipulated or stated, and therefore I'm confident that we will have the funding package in place as the required timeline. It's simply for us to decide on the capital swaps that we've got to do within our own internal funding mechanism, and that is relatively straightforward.
Thank you. I see that Gary has just joined us. Gary, was there something you wanted to say?
No, to be honest, I wasn't expecting to join the meeting today. Okay. I thought the report that was authored was very clear, and I didn't necessarily feel that as an officer I needed to add anything particularly to it. I wasn't expecting to attend, but if there's any questions, I'll happily field them.
Thank you. Sorry for putting you on the spot.
It's all right.
Are there any other questions? No? Okay, so let's move to decisions. So the proposal is, the recommendation is that we agree that written confirmation must be provided by Essex County Council to SELET accountable body by the 12th of February 2021 to confirm the funding package is in place for the project to enable the release of the remaining 0.495 million LGF to Essex County Council for the delivery of the project beyond the 31st of March 2021. Can I see whether your hands on this if you agree? Thank you. Do we agree that if written confirmation is not provided by Essex County Council, as stated in 2.1.1, then the remaining 0.495 LGF will be reallocated to the LGF pipeline? Thank you. And agree that if written confirmation is not provided by Essex County Council, there is compelling justification for the CELEP accountable body not to recover the 2.239 million LGF spent on the project to date, subject to the LGF spent to date on the project continuing to meet the LGF grant conditions for capital expenditure. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move now on to item 9, which is the University of Essex Parkside Phase 3. Howard, you're on the spot again on this one. Thanks.
And I was almost on mute as well. Thank you, Chair. That was close. So just, I think, firstly, an apology to Gary. I was under the impression he was in the loop, so apologies for that, putting him on the spot. It seems as if we might have a similar situation on Parkside. I have been talking in conversation with a colleague of Bryn's at the university, who kindly volunteered Bryn as a guest speaker, and he may have been caught on the hop as well. So apologies for that.
Bryn's on the call.
He's on the. I can see. Yeah, to see his name popping up. Hopefully he is fine. So the University of Essex Parkside 3. This also is a report for the board to receive an update on the delivery of this particular project. Quick update: the project received £5 million of LGF in February of 2020, subject to necessary planning permissions being in place. Since the original board decision, the higher education sector has been significantly disrupted by COVID-19, and the University of Essex implemented a cash conservation strategy, which meant that this project was put on hold earlier this year. Alongside this, the planning process slowed immensely and the decision on this was delayed. However, I can confirm to the board that the Section 106 has now been signed and planning permission has been issued by Colchester Borough Council. However, funding remains a difficulty, and the University Council are meeting on the 30th of November to consider whether the project will receive university funding to continue. Board members remember that the funding package included a £5.5 million match from the university. A bid has been put forward to Success Essex for additional funding as part of the additional LGF programme, and will be considered by the CELEP Strategic Board in December. It is recommended to the board that a further report is brought to the board in February of 2021, where clearer assurances can be provided around delivery of the project. However, if funding is not confirmed following the University Council meeting on the 30th of November, it is recommended that the Accountability Board agree that the LGF be removed from the project and allocated to the next project available in the LGF pipeline once agreed by the Strategic Board in December of 2020.
Yeah.
That's all I was going to say. Thank you.
It doesn't bother me.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Bryn, was there anything?
I'll come down.
Councillor Finch, you're not on mute. Did you have some? Councillor Finch wanted to say something.
I beg your pardon, Chairman. I've got roofers on my roof, funny enough, and they're working to correct a leak. So I do apologise, and I may have to exit for 5 minutes only. What I wanted to say in support of what Howard said was I've also had conversations with the University of Essex, and I know that the project Parkside 3 has the support of the Vice-Chancellor. And as Howard has said, it's going to the committee on the 30th of November. So we will have very clear direction by that time as to whether it's been supported or not.
Thank you, Councillor Finch.
And
I hope your roofers get things sorted. Thank you. Are there any other comments, questions on this one? Simon.
So it sounds to me, notwithstanding what Howard said about the other application for other funds that might come through, that most of the decision really pivot on Council's decision on the 30th of November. So just so I'm clear in my head, I'm not sure whether the first recommendation we would come to applies in this case, but if it does hinge on the 30th of November, we can pretty much make a decision now based on whatever that decision on the 30th of November is. We don't necessarily have to bring it back in February and leave it that long. It appears to be that's fairly black and white and fairly simple because it's a council decision, university council decision. I may have oversimplified it.
Howard or Rhiannon, are you able to answer that?
I think Rhiannon wants to go.
I think you're right. I think it's slightly more than just two scenarios, though. It's not just a case of whether the university fund it. It's actually also relates to the additional local growth fund that they're also seeking. So I think there's a scenario that perhaps the university could approve the funding, but the strategic board don't support the project, and therefore we might still have an issue around the funding package for the project. So I think that's the reason we're looking for that additional confirmation that if that scenario were to arise, we'd bring back an update to February to kind of make sure that the issues are fully resolved and the project can proceed.
Good, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Chris.
Sarah, yes. Do we want to just send a message to the University Council that clearly if they're looking for additional LGF funding, i.e. that they do not wish to fund it themselves, but are hoping that it will come from further LGF funding, that there is a significant risk that the strategic board may decide to allocate the whole lot elsewhere in those circumstances?
Rhiannon.
I think, yeah, perhaps it might be sensible for us to write formally to the university to confirm the position following this meeting and set out. So we're looking for confirmation of both the university's contribution as well as needing additional LGF. So there's two parts of the funding that need to be confirmed for the project to proceed. So yeah, if we write formally, I think that's a good suggestion.
Having served as a university chair in those circumstances, I would probably say, oh, well, let's see if we can get it from the LGF rather than the university funds, which will keep from something else. And I think that they need to be given a very clear message that if they decide that that's the route they want to try, it is by no means guaranteed that Success Essex or indeed the CELEP Strategic Board ultimately will do that. I think we have to, the deal was that they would match it. And I don't think we're giving them a free option not to. And I think that's a very clear message that needs to go back to them. Otherwise, if I were chair of university in those circumstances, which I have been in the past, I would say, government can fund it.
Thank you, Chris. Good point. We will make sure that happens. Councillor Woodley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think Chris is quite right. I think they cannot rely on that extra funding coming through because there's other projects that are in line that are also desperate for funding to continue as well. So I think there's a very big risk that might not happen.
Yeah, I'm sure that the natural preference, Ron, would be for projects in the vicinity to get that funding, rather than then if there are none in the vicinity, then it could go to Kent or East Sussex. But I think the natural prejudice from the strategic board would be to try and fund something else locally that might be more worthwhile.
Yeah, we've also got to remember that that they couldn't afford to fund the Forum 2 in Southend either, so they can't have it always.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Yeah, just as the higher education representative, just to make the point, I think it would be fair to write to the Vice Chancellor and the Council and make it clear what the position is. So just to share that. Thank you.
Thank you. We will definitely do action that. Okay, so unless there are any other questions, I will now take it forward to the decisions. So do we agree that the project be paused and that no LGF grant transferred until the confirmation can be provided to the board at its next meeting on the 12th of February 2021 that the outstanding planning and funding issues have been resolved? I can't see. Are we quorate, Suzanne?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. Fine. So it's just a couple of members aren't able to be seen at the moment. Agree that should the Council of the University of Essex not agree to continue to support the project at their meeting on the 30th of November 2020, the LGF grant allocation will be removed from the project and allocated to the next project available in the LGF pipeline once agreed by the Strategic Board in December 2020. You agree? Thank you. Do you agree that if all issues aren't resolved by the 12th of February 2021, the funding should be considered for reallocation to the next project in the LGF pipeline? Thank you. And note that the following confirmation set out above, further approval will be required from the CELEP Strategic Board in March 2021 to allow spend beyond the growth deal period. Okay, thank you.
Chair, can I just, is it worth adding in about the extra funding that they require, that may not be necessarily coming forward?
Didn't know whether that was actually something just for a note in the letter rather than a vote. Suzanne, advise me on this, please.
Yeah, I think we could put in a note about writing a letter on that. I don't think we can necessarily put in a decision on that because we don't want to fetter the discretion of Strategic Board to make their own decisions. Right, okay. We're two separate entities, so we just need to be quite clear. But we could note that we're going to write a letter.
Yeah, that's fine.
So it's just basically note that we have agreed that the accountable body will write, the accountability board will write, or the strategic board, and or the secretariat will write to the university to outline the issues regarding further LGF funding. Yep, something like that. Okay, great. Let's now move on to the item 10, which is the Growing Places Fund update. I believe Helen is reporting on this. Obviously, previously the Strategic Board had agreed that flexibility should be given where the ability of partners to repay loans has been impacted by COVID-19, and you will probably remember that we have previously agreed some other projects have flexibility on this. So Helen.
Thank you. So as usual, the report sets out an update on the delivery of the Growing Places Fund projects and progress towards realisation of the expected project benefits. I'm primarily going to focus on the revised repayment schedules that have been set out within the report. So there are 5 proposed revised repayment schedules provided. Other repayment risks have been identified and the board will be updated once further details are available. There still remains an element of uncertainty regarding the full impact of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, and therefore a number of the revised repayment schedules have been established to reflect the perceived worst case scenario. Should the risks identified not be fully realised, repayment of the GPF loans will be accelerated. All 5 of the projects seeking revised repayment schedules have been directly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The reasons for the revised repayment schedules are set out within the report, but in summary, the changes are due to the impact on the property market and the impact that this has had on property owners' ability to refinance their properties in order to secure the finance needed to repay loans received. Delay of works that were planned to be undertaken on site, and cash flow implications of offering a repayment-free period to loan recipients and the rent-free period to commercial tenants during the COVID-19 pandemic. Of the 5 projects under consideration by the board today, Workspace Kent is the only project where there is an identified risk that full repayment may not be possible. One of the loans issued by Kent County Council as part of the Workspace Kent project has an outstanding balance of £18,767. As previously reported, this debt is currently subject to an individual voluntary arrangement or IVA process. Kent County Council are awaiting the outcome of this process and the board will be updated once the final outcome is known. I think that's all I'm going to say unless anyone's got any queries on the report.
Thanks, Helen. Any queries? Councillor Finch, were you raising your hand? Or was that
Chairman, I was simply putting something back on a shelf.
Thank you. Councillor Gough.
Thank you. Just a couple of points, if I may. I mean, one is just in the case of Workspace Kent, that as I think is indicated, this is what we're actually deciding today, ratifies a stance that informally was agreed anyway, that there would be a 12-month interest-free repayment holiday offered by KCC. So in a sense, this is simply ratifying. And indeed, on certainly the projects that I'm aware of, there is generally a pretty good pattern of repayments. There are just certain very specific deferrals which are asked for. I'll leave it at that, Chairman. Chair.
Thank you. I note that Sarah Nurden has pointed out there is a minor typo in Table 5 on page 81, and the current repayment schedule is 0.5 million repayment in 2021 rather than 0.55 million. So please, if you could note that. Thank you, Sarah, for pointing that out. Okay, Simon.
Thank you. It doesn't pertain to the 5 that we need to make decisions on necessarily today, but I note in the report there were 2 projects where you hadn't had an update on their ability to meet the repayment schedule. I know it's not ragged as red, but how much of a concern is that if they've not been in communication?
Thanks, Helen. Are you able to answer that?
Yes, so obviously in light of the ongoing impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, there is a concern there, and we are engaging with the scheme promoters to seek confirmation in relation to their ability to repay the loan and the timing of those repayments. We do acknowledge that is a risk, and we are pushing for that information.
Thanks, Helen. Okay, so unless there are any other queries, Councillor Gough.
So just say on, I think it's page 77, we have the list of projects there, which is, yeah, and I think that is missing. Sorry, I'm just double checking my notes, bear with me. There is one project which I believe is missing from that. Herne Relief Road, yes, it's not shown in the table, but it is due to be coming back to the February Accountability Board.
Yes, apologies for that. When I prepared the update report, I was expecting the Herne Relief Road decision to be on this agenda.
Yeah, no, indeed, absolutely.
I forgot to add it back in.
No, just for the sake of good order. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I would just say generally the strategic board was quite conscious of the effects of the pandemic on the GPF loans, and therefore we do wish, the strategic board certainly was of the stance that it did wish to be sympathetic to those businesses or projects which have been affected by the pandemic. And I think it's entirely consistent with what central government wants us to do in relation to into GPF, and in particular things like the historic dockyard, which have had, you know, very low footfall visitors during the pandemic. We will be quite sympathetic to rescheduling or requests for rescheduling, and that goes with most projects where the pandemic has clearly had an effect on turnover or other matters. So just to bear in mind, which I think the Accountability Board has been very consistent with that. So thank you.
Absolutely, thank you very much. And I think we had previously agreed a repayment, changed the repayment schedule for the dockyard anyway at the last Accountability Board meeting, if I remember rightly. So unless there are any other queries, I think it's to note the updated position on the GPF programme. That noted. Thank you. And to approve the revised repayment schedule for 5 projects, so no interest will be charged on the loan. And the 5 projects are Workspace Kent project, Live Margate, No Use Empty Commercial Project Kent, North Queensway project, and Sovereign Harbour project. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. Okay, so we are now moving on swiftly to item 11, which is an update on the SELEP Revenue Budget 2020-21 and proposed revenue. I think, Lorna, I'm handing over to you on this.
Thank you, Sarah. So thank you. I just wanted to share some slides with you this morning to help make it a bit clearer as I run through the presentation to make the numbers come alive a little bit. Hopefully now, whoops, no,
yeah, we can see it's coming, I think.
Looks like it's coming. Oh,
oh, wrong screen though, Lorna.
I'm not sure I'm sharing the right thing there. That's not going very well. Apologies. Let's just try that one more time, otherwise I'll progress without sharing the screen. Oh no, so it's there. Has that come through now?
Yeah.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
So, so yes, just good morning. So today, giving the update on the CELEP revenue budget for forecast for the 2021 position, and to present the proposed revenue budget for 21-22. Oh, apologies. No, I can't. All right, there we go. Just moving first to the current year position. This is showing a forecast underspend of 142,000. This is a movement from the previously reported position that was expected to be online. The movement's primarily due to the unanticipated receipt of additional revenue funding of £125,000 that's been allocated to support the Getting Building Fund programme. This funding is being used to offset some of the additional staffing and IT costs arising from managing that programme. So the underspend means that that we can have a reduced withdrawal from reserves down to 185,000, which will then be required to support the budget in 2020-21. This reduced withdrawal from reserves will leave 742,000 at the end of the year to support the future year's budgets. Moving on to look at the proposed position for 21-22. As a reminder for the board, the activities of the LEP are constrained by the funding available to support it in any given year. Prior to this year, the revenue budget has been supported by high levels of external interest received on the capital balance held in relation to the Local Growth Fund and the Growing Places Fund. Since the outset of the COVID pandemic, the significant reduction in interest rates combined with the ending of the LGF programme at the end of this year means that this is no longer a funding stream that can be relied upon for the budget. For context, in 1920, over £800,000 of external interest was received to support the external budget. So in recognition of this challenge in July, the board approved the ring-fencing of £1 million contribution from the GPF revenue grant to support the revenue budget in 21-22 and in 22-23 following the strategic board endorsement of that approach. So the proposed budget today incorporates this. The proposed budget set on the table includes a gross spend of 3.3 million and a forecast income of 2.4 million. The balance here being 904,000 contributions from reserves, which when offset by the £1 million contribution from the GPF grant results in a net contribution to reserves of 96,000. This approach leaves an expected 838,000 to be carried forward in reserves to support the budgets from 22-23 onwards. It should be noted that within the position set out on the screen that there's been a number of assumptions made with regard to the receipt of revenue grants, which have yet to be confirmed by government. Should this funding not be received, the budget will need to be reviewed to ensure that it remains affordable. So we'll be looking at that position and bringing an updated position back to the board in early 21-22. One of the key funding streams of the budget is the £500,000 core funding received annually from government. This grant has not yet been confirmed, but we haven't received any indication that it won't be made again in 21-22. To access this funding from government, CELEP is required to demonstrate match funding of at least 250,000. In past years, 200,000 of this match has been made available through the local authority contributions. For For 21-22, in recognition that the local authority budgets are highly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, Adam and his team have proposed that the SELEP budget seeks to accommodate a smaller contribution from the local authorities, totaling 150,000. The proposed allocations from each authority are set out in the table, being split across each authority as they have done historically based on their relative population. As part of this item today, we're looking for confirmation of these contributions to assure this element of the budget position and to support the claim for the core funding from government. This next table sets out the forecast reserves position for the current and future years. The minimum level of reserves is currently set at 200,000. This minimum value is set to ensure that sufficient funds are available to support any wind down costs of SELEP should these be required. The latest review of these costs based on the proposed staffing levels of the SELEP Secretariat into 21-22 suggests it would be prudent to increase this value to 260,000 to ensure that sufficient funding remains in place, and approval of this increase is also being sought today. Taking this into account, the table forecasts the reserves position up to 23-24. This suggests that by the end of 22-23, the reserves will be at the minimum level. This would mean that under the current exemplifications in 23-24, there will be no funding remaining in reserves to support the budget. So to look at the impact of this slide sets out that the reserves position and demonstrates that if no other funding is identified to support the budget, that compared to the proposed position for 21-22, the following 2 years' budgets would need to be reduced by 23% and 47% respectively. This suggests that the level of activities that the Secretariat would be able to support would need to be significantly scaled back. From an accountable body perspective, we would require assurance that, as a minimum, any ongoing commitments in relation to delivery of contractual or grant obligations could be met in setting the budget for those years. This risk combined with the lack of clarity and certainty from government with regards to funding continues to make medium-term planning a challenge. The accountable body continues to work with SELEP Secretariat to consider the options to address the ongoing funding challenges. Thank you very much, Chair. Happy to pick up any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, Lorna. Okay, so any questions or comments from anybody? Councillor Finch and then Councillor Chambers.
Well, Chairman, I would ask Lorna what are the recommendations then to deal with that budget gap or deficit in the years 23-24, for example. Because quite clearly to see a 47% reduction in the Secretariat or the ability of SELEP to carry out its business is not a position I would have thought that we want to be in.
No, clearly not. The options are, to be honest, extremely limited. There is either, because the Secretariat isn't really in a position to generate its own income other than the receipt of interest on external balances held, and given the lack of confirmation of any future funding investment in that space, I think it's going to be difficult. And if interest rates remain low, that makes it very challenging. So at the moment, the only other options look to trying to secure a different additional and more additional funding from government and more assurance around that funding from government as well, because actually if they could confirm a 3-year funding package, that would make life much more difficult. I can see Suzanne wants to come in here, and I'm sure as she's very involved in the budget, she might have something further to add.
Yeah, Suzanne, and then we'll go to Councillor Chambers.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, we are working with the LEP network as well. Chris might actually want to come in too. I'm working with the LEP network because of effectively all LEPs and all their secretariats are in exactly the same position. In fact, some LEPs are facing the drop off in next year. We've managed to be able to put that off for a couple of years through some sort of prudent planning in earlier years, but it is a massive existential risk to all LEPs in the country at the moment, and the LEP network are lobbying hard for a multi-year settlement for LEPs.
Yes, I mean, perhaps I can comment here. I mean, what's interesting is that the ask of the LEP, the individual LEPs, and indeed the LEP network from central government has increased, is increasing. So, for example, we had a huge amount of work. All LEPs had a huge amount of work to do in relation to the governance, which was expensive last year, which we met that challenge. The current year, we've seen the impact of the pandemic, and indeed the additional work, a large amount of work that was placed on us at short notice under the Getting Building Fund, and it is to be expected with the green agenda coming up that the government is asking LEPs to play a larger role there, and indeed a lot of the was just discussing yesterday with the East Kent bid for UK research funding for Sandwich and Discovery Park. Further expectations from government that LEPs will get involved in the governance of successful projects there as well. So what I'm saying is that the ask of LEPs by central government has increased, is increasing. We may know more when the spending review is announced, we believe next week, as to what the future either for shared prosperity or further regional growth funding will be. So in a sense, it would be better to have this conversation after we know the results of what's happening next week, because there may be some clarity. But on behalf of the LEP network, the regional chairs, of which I'm one with Catalyst South, have written to government and lobbied government for all the things that Suzanne was talking about, was certainty and assurance, and as to the amount and to the length of funding going forward. But in doing this and having this discussion today in advance of the spending review next week, the outcome of the spending review next week is a little bit premature, and I would sort of caveat my remarks with that major uncertainty, which hopefully will be resolved in some shape or form after the spending review. And if it isn't after the spending review, then you can imagine that I and my other LEP regional colleagues will be continuing to lobby hard.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Chambers, and then I've got Councillor Gough, and then Councillor Woodley, and then Simon. Thank you.
Members will, particularly members of the board, will know how I'm referring to the contributions from local authorities, how grumpy I got last year's budget over the repayment back to local authorities to help support the federated areas. Okay, that's water under the bridge. As far as I can't speak for the other local authorities, yes, we're all in difficulties as far as our budgets are concerned, particularly relating to COVID-19 and the effects. But at the end of the day, we also want to help and support the LEP, because the LEP is also under pressure because of the impacts of COVID-19, because of the considerations that it has to make to and for those that have made applications through the LEP for growth fund, etc., and extensions. So there's more work and also the need to enhance the skills agenda and all these sorts of things. So I, for one, would have thought that, and particularly this would send a message to the government also, as far as the perhaps getting more for the core funding from central government, that the difference in contributions, okay, it's easy for me from Medway to say so, is relatively small. But I think from our point, we would be prepared to pay what we're paying now.
Thank you, Councillor Chambers. Then I think it was Councillor Gough.
Thank you. Picking up a little bit on some of the topics that Rodney raised, I mean, clearly there is always the debate between what goes at the level of the LEP and what does at the level of the federated boards. And all of us, I think, fairly recognising that we're all within a constrained amount of money, probably an inadequate amount of money. And going back to Chris's point, all of us would much like to see some multi-year clarity on where we all stand. One suggestion is that, I mean, I think we've made made our position clear on the contribution, the local authority contribution. We're content with what is put forward here. There was the money also given by MHCLG, 125,000 for work on the Getting Building Fund. And I would raise the question as to whether some of that should be allocated to local areas, given that local areas are carrying out quite a lot, maybe about half of the work on that. I think it was 125,000, and whether one could split it between, let us say, the LEP, the ITE, and the local authorities, because we are certainly carrying out a lot of work in that area.
Thank you. Lorna or Suzanne, would you like to comment on that?
Certainly, I mean, obviously that's not what's proposed in the paper, and I know in terms of the commitments for the select budget, they had asked from the government quite a lot more than the funding that was actually allocated, and in terms of the commitments they already have, allocating some additional out to local partners may be more challenging, but I'll leave Suzanne to see if she wants to comment further.
Yeah, we were asked by CLGU to make an assessment of the additional revenue impact of the GBF processes, the operational side. We made an assessment, we submitted that, and we got much less than the costs that we're actually incurring. So it is quite difficult for us, whilst we recognise that there is a lot of work that is happening out locally. It's just very difficult for us to be able to fund that when we can't actually fund the full costs of the impact ourselves. Adam, you had a conversation, didn't you, with officials around the impact of GBF, sorry.
I did. I mean, and for us, it's very real. So, you know, there's the additional cost of the ITE, obviously, and we've brought in an additional member of staff to carry the work too. So, yeah, I had a few conversations, and I probably wouldn't want to repeat, you know, many of them, but it was along those similar lines. I think what I suppose government have failed to do adequately in this scenario is recognise the amount of work that's created for us, which, you know, is quite a lot more than other LEPs. You know, we've got, you know, lots of projects, lots of which we'll see today. And with that comes those responsibilities, and obviously we're unique in some respects in for the fact that we pay for the ITE from that central pot, and you know, ultimately that 125,000 has gone, you know, to the things I've just mentioned. So we do keep pushing back, and I think in previous years when we've gone away from this conversation, we've pushed back to government and requested further funding when that's been forthcoming. We've been very clear. So that conversation's ongoing. We'll continue to ask those questions, and of course we'll continue to keep the board appraised, you know, when we hear anything in relation to any further support.
Thank you. So are we saying that if there was good news from the CSR, then we might be able to revisit that? Is that what we might be able to revisit the budget and the question that Roger asked, Councillor Gough asked, sorry.
So I think the spending review is, as I say, is due to be announced. I think it's next Thursday, and we hope that there will be something in there around the successor to LGF, which is likely to be the Shared Prosperity Fund, and also the future, whether the role of LEPs will be greater or lesser or what from the spending review next week. And I'm not putting too many bets on what's going to happen on a favorable outcome, but it is we do anticipate something coming out of that. Yeah, and I think that that's why I feel that the discussion is a little premature, given there is likely to be news next week. But I may be disappointed. In fact, I probably will be disappointed.
Yeah, we need to take a decision at this point. It's a sort of time critical decision, so that we're able to have a budget in place for the beginning of the year, which the accountable body most definitely will want us to have a budget in place. What we can do, if there is changes or significant announcements at SR next week, we can then make revisions to the budget following that point. quite often there will be announcements at spending review, but what that actually means to any individual organisation obviously takes some time to feed through the system. You would know how much allocations. And I think, yes, when we know what our ongoing funding situation is, I think we need to have conversations with partners about how we fund the activity that sits across the wider partnership and where the activity sits, and have those conversations, as Councillor Gough has raised. And they need to feature in those revisions if we do have access to greater resources.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I've got Simon and then Councillor Woodley and then Councillor Finch.
I just wanted to ask a question about staffing costs, and that may be a bit more sensitive for you to be able to answer in this forum. So please don't feel the need to have to take it offline. But I just wouldn't mind knowing whether the 12% increase in our staffing costs, notwithstanding the fact that we know that income is going to be tougher, is really as a result of those new projects like GBF. I think you alluded on the paper that it may not. It may be to do with other things that we need to do.
So the funding position for staffing is showing growth. So it's effectively some of it's where there's the additional staff coming through from that being funded through by grants. But there's also provision within the budget to incorporate 2 additional posts that are deemed as required in next financial year to support the wider programme.
So they're not specifically for GBF, for example?
There is one post specifically for GBF, yes.
Okay, great. So one of those is for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Woodley.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, Chair. I apologise now if I'm going to say the wrong thing, so please forgive me in advance. But I think there's a number of questions here. Is that we need to understand is the government's going to carry on funding major projects through the LEPs, and of course, if they are, then a longer term funding plan will be much welcomed. And of course, the Secretariat, it's important. It does a hell of a lot of job for us, keeps us informed, and progresses all the workload that the LEP takes on board. So really, I've got a few questions. Do we want the LEP to continue? And I think the answer to that is yes, I do. Do we now look at the funding that's required, and do we need to, rather than have a falling off the cliffs approach, do we increase each authority? Do we increase our contributions so that that cliff doesn't happen? And if we do it now, it'll be a lot less painful than we do at the very end. And or the third thing is, do we change the way we fund it all? Rather than on population, should we not have a percentage applied to the amount of funding we get through the LEP to do the projects in each individual area? And would that be a more fairer way? Because I'm looking at it, and Essex and Kent pay a hell of a lot more money. Is that fair on them? I know it's based on population, but you know, everybody gets a pretty good chunk, and we all work together about making sure that we're fair on projects. They get a pretty good chunk of monies in all the areas. And I just wonder whether we should look differently in terms of the contributions the authorities pay in to support the LEP and the Secretariat through the amount of funding we do actually get rather than on population. Because it seems to me at the moment, I know Southend's paying a lot less, so I shouldn't be saying this probably, but I think
yes, you should.
I should get the backlash of this, David, after this meeting. But we should possibly need to relook at it, because this is an important function for us as the authorities. The workload on the Secretariat is large. I think the information we get is tremendous. And quite honestly, you know, the way we're doing it based on population, I do believe is unfair to Essex and Kent mainly, and I see East Sussex.
I agree.
But I just think maybe a different way of how we fund the Secretariat should be looked into. And it could be on the basis of the funding that's been allocated in the previous year to going forward into the following year. But that's and I apologise if I've upset anybody.
No.
Thanks, Councillor Woodley. Suzanne, do you want to come back on that now, or Lorna, or should we take Councillor Finch first? Let's take Councillor Finch first.
This is very easy for me. I agree with the comments made by Chris at the very beginning, which is wait for the comprehensive spending review next week. Secondly, I agree with Rodney that, you know, the financial situation needs to be looked at. And thirdly, I agree with Ron in terms of maybe we want to look at how we fund it. But in summary, I would say we need a separate meeting to discuss how we move this forward, waiting for this comprehensive spending review, and then have a separate meeting to discuss how we move it forward. Maybe on the basis of what Ron said, which I would think is great, because I think Southend and Thurrock need to treble their contributions, as an example only, and just to be provocative. But I would move the recommendations, if there are any, in terms of Lorna's spreadsheet and the forecast of the funding up to 23-24.
There you go, David. Just as I thought you were beginning to like me.
I did.
Can I just make a point, Chair, if I could, and that is that I think we had commissioned a working group to look at the funding of the administrative costs of CELOP, and I know that that working group has been working away. I think just taking Councillor Finch's request for a separate meeting, I think I hope that the working group would be in a position soon to be able to report on their findings. I think they clearly need to take into account anything that comes out of the spending review next week, and should report to the Accountability Board having done their work. And I don't know if Adam or Suzanne, you're able to let me know where the working group has got to, if anywhere. But is that? I know I think Perry Gladding was heading that up. And,
Thank you.
I'm not sure where he's got to.
Suzanne, would you like to comment? And then I've got Councillor Glazier as well.
So yes, the working group have considered sort of the options, but the options, as Lorna kind of set out earlier, are very, very limited. They're unless there is more funding that can be applied by government. We don't have revenue streams. We're not commercial. There isn't many options for us to pursue. I would suggest that what we could do is move to set this as the original budget for next year, and then following spending review, we can go away. Lorna and I will work on some exemplifications and playing in the new information that we get and any particular updates that we might have on the future of UK SPF, so on and so forth, and then come back and present again to this board at a point in 21-22 where a revised budget could be set if we do have access, and we can consider the future year's budgets if that meets the satisfaction of the board. And we'll also look at different models of allocation of how that contribution from local authorities could be allocated other than population, and present them as options to the board.
Thanks, Suzanne. Councillor Glazier and then Councillor Goff.
Thank you. And if we need someone to second the point that the budget needs accepting as it is today, I think that's a good idea. There are two things. First and foremost is both local government and the LEP find itself in the same position. We won't, my prediction is we'll know nothing by next Friday. Broad brush comments. I understand that the local government settlement will be coming out in the week of the 14th of December. And so, you know, we've got to wait until Christmas. So I think let's accept this as a really good piece of work that's been done that sets out a clear way forward, and have this conversation later. And I have to say, I'm not as buoyant and upbeat about looking at the reallocation of the funding, simply because East Sussex is probably one of the poorest and most deprived parts of the...
Yeah.
Thank you.
Tears in my eyes.
Thank you, Councillor Glazier. So Councillor Goff and then Councillor Gledhill, please.
Thank you. I entirely agree with what Keith just said about the timing of when we'll know things. I mean, certainly from a local authority point of view, the spending review is only a headline and the key data comes later. So I think we do agree with what we've got today. We do review along the lines of what was suggested and bring it back once we have that more comprehensive information. And I would put in my plea that what I raised earlier is part of that agenda when we have more information.
Thank you, Councillor Gletter.
Thanks, Chair. I agree with Ron wholeheartedly on a different approach. And Chris beat me to the punch with saying obviously there's a subcommittee dealing with the way that funding's allocated, but it would seem natural indeed we're changing our model locally on the way that we fund things like project managers. If you've got a large project going forward, normally it's just seen as an extra expense on the general fund, which quite frankly, if it was a private business, it would form part of the business proposition to be fully staffed. So in this, I don't see why we should be any different. Rather than an arbitrary per head of population, it should be effectively a percentage of the amount of money you get. Whether it be one project that's extremely large or 10 small projects, there's still a huge amount of money being allocated to different local authorities. And bearing in mind, I think we'll be the lowest contributor under the current scheme, which obviously I'm over the moon about. But the reality is that fair? And would it give an argument for, I don't know, any other local authority that's got barely anything, but is much more affluent, like, well, actually all of them, they are being unfairly penalised. I know if anyone was watching this from the public, and I'm sure there are thousands and thousands of people watching this, they'd be thinking, yeah, well, why am I losing out as an Essex/Kent County Council taxpayer? Because the money from the LEP it's all going down to East Sussex, obviously, because they are the poorest of the lot. I say that with a bit of amusement. Obviously, we're much more poor when it comes to problems with income, etc.
Thank you. Okay, so Suzanne or Lorna, in terms of we can still move to note the current forecast revenue outturn position for 2020-21 of an underspend of 142,000. So if we could note that, I would suggest. And then is there a little bit of rewording that we're suggesting on the approving, which takes on board the comments that have been made, please?
I think what I'm suggesting is that we take the decisions as they're set out in the report now, with the addition of a note that a review of the budget will be made in 21-22 when further information is available, if the board is content with that approach.
Thank you. Are you happy to note that? Yeah, thank you. So do we approve the revenue budget for 2021-22 set out in Table 5, including the net contribution to reserves of 96,000 as set out in Table 8? Thank you. And confirm that local authority partners will contribute the match funding required to secure the core funding expected from MHCLG in 2021-22 as set out in Table 7.
Oh, you're on mute, Sarah.
Sorry, don't know how that happened. Slip of the fifth. Approve the recommended increase to the minimum level of reserves to 260,000 from 21-22, held to meet the costs of closure should CELAP cease to function. Thank you. Okay, so let's move very, very briefly to item 12, which is the CELAP operations update. Suzanne.
Yes, I will keep this very brief so that we can move to the break. There was just a couple of items to note. So the assurance framework was brought to consult with this board at the last meeting. That assurance framework has now been adopted by strategic board, as you'll be aware, as you sit on strategic board as well. So that is now our functioning assurance framework. We don't think that the government are intending to make any changes to the national assurance framework in this year. At least we really hope that they won't. So that should be our standing assurance framework and governance framework from now on. I've provided an update on the risk register. Most of the risks stand as they did previously, obviously a number of risks around the pandemic, continuing risk around workload, and planning, and issues around budgeting because we don't have multi-year agreements, but I think we've covered that sufficiently under the previous item. We have raised one risk sort of back up the ladder. This is around the EU end of EU transition period. We are expecting that government will lean on the growth hub and the growth hub structure quite heavily to provide communications as the transition period ends at the end of this year. The approach so far has been ad hoc and uncoordinated. There's small amounts of money, lots of small grants that are given at very short notice with very, very stringent agreements on how they can be applied, and they bring with them a huge administrative overhead. We expect that to continue, which unfortunately puts further pressure on the Secretariat. We are a small team, and absorbing the administrative overhead of managing all of these grants that are all different and all require different paperwork and huge amounts of bureaucracy, in some cases for the growth hubs grants for what are fairly minimal amounts of funding, will continue and probably get worse as we go through the EU through that position in next year. So just flagging that as a risk.
Thank you, Suzanne. And it goes without saying that, I mean, my thanks certainly continue to the Secretariat for all the work that they're doing with very challenging situations, often, obviously. So does anybody have any queries from this? If not, I'd like us to note that the new 2020 assurance framework, as agreed by the Strategic Board, and the updated assurance framework monitoring, and note the risk register at Appendix C. Thank you. Okay, so now I'd like to suggest we have a 5-minute comfort break, if rather than a 10-minute comfort break, given the timings and the amount of things that we've got to go through on the agenda. So if you could come back by 11:53, that would be great. So we can turn our cameras off now, quickly get a cup of tea, and see you in 5 minutes. Thank you. Ron, I think you're on, Councillor Woodley, I think you're on mute, sorry.
Just reading on 8.2 on the previous report, is significant impact on interest earned. Shouldn't that be earned? I'm not good at grammar, but it just doesn't read right to me.
You are quite right, Ron. We'll pick this one up.
Oh, crikey! I got that right, did I? Oh, blimey! Yeah.
I think earned and earned are both acceptable in British English, but Adam and I will have a discussion about that later. It's one of our favourite things to argue about grammar.
I might have a smile on my face all day now over a T or a D. There you go.
It's always worth asking these things, I think. Sorry, we'll just wait till a few more people are able to join us so we're fully quorate. Great. Thank you. Sorry for pushing the break to slightly shorter amount of time, but we've got a huge amount to get through and some really significant decisions on the Getting Building Fund programme. So I'd like to go forwards now if we can. Are we quorate? Yep. Okay, so let's move forwards to item 13 on the Getting Building Fund programme update. Rhiannon, so this is a bit of an overview of the GBF programme.
Yeah, so yeah, this half of the meeting, we'll be looking at 26 Getting Building Fund projects. So it'll be almost all of the projects now coming forward for consideration by the board. This report itself just sets out an overview of the planned spend. So during this financial year, we're planning to spend £29.68 million local growth funds. It does mean that there'll be some unspent Getting Building funds during this financial year. So if projects are able to complete earlier, then there is funding for us to be able to do that, and the board can agree to accelerate projects. However, if that's not the case, we'll bring back some options to the board at the next meeting to discuss how we mitigate that issue and whether we use some similar option, because there's the option 4 we currently use on the local growth funds. In terms of other points I wanted to just quickly raise. So we've got confirmation and we've received the funding for this financial year, which is half of the £85 million. The second half we're not due to receive until next financial year. We don't yet have full confirmation of that funding. It's provisionally allocated, but we do not have grant condition letters or anything like that for that second tranche of funding. That's very much the way government's worked for the local growth funds, but it does create a risk around that second tranche of funding. So today we're approving projects, but actually that second tranche funding, it will be subject to that second tranche of funding being available. So particularly where projects are split across this financial year and next financial year, that does present a risk. So I want the board to be aware of that. Obviously, we'll be strongly making the case for government for that second tranche of funding, particularly if we've been able to show that the progress to date on the Getting Building funds. These are now getting underway, these projects. The second point I just want to raise before we move on to the conversation about the specific projects is around the outputs and outcomes. So as part of the original submission to central government, we were asked to provide information about the expected jobs and houses and different benefits of these projects. Since then, obviously, a lot of work has been done in developing business cases for those projects. We've now been asked to provide an updated baseline information to central government to set out now what we're expecting in terms of benefits of these schemes. There's been a fairly substantial change to those expected benefits, but primarily our frustration here is that governments are now focusing very much on the next 4 years and the benefits achieved within the very short term. Whereas previously there was no kind of timescales in which the government were asking us to specify the benefits of the projects over. So it has led to a very substantial reduction in some of the benefits that are stated over for the projects because of that focus on the next 4 years. So government have picked out particular projects that they want to have a further conversation with, and I'm expecting those conversations to happen next week. But just in terms of the recommendations for the next few reports, what we're actually recommending is that all of the funding decisions are subject to government agreeing any changes to project outcomes identified for these projects. So there will be that step of that formally need to be agreed with government. So I just want to flag that now. Yeah, we're working very closely with local partners, but also pressing back to government on the frustration here, because lots of very short deadlines have been set, creating inconsistencies, and obviously the inconsistency in how they're looking at the benefits that we're stating that we're going to deliver. I think that was everything I was going to say. Going forward, this will be much more detailed updates where we talk about the risks and the actual progress on these projects. But for the time being, just a fairly short update for me.
Thank you, Rhiannon. So just to note that you will, when we come to the individual projects, there is a new bit of wording that's going to be added to some of the proposals, which is about the government agreeing to any changes to project outcomes identified for these projects. So that has been added. I don't think that was in your original pack, just so you are aware of that. However, we'll look through that. So are there any queries at this point before we go into the detail of the projects themselves? Councillor Chambers.
How are we dealing, in view of what Rhiannon has just said to us, how are we dealing with the 8 projects that we agreed at the last accountability board? Because those, having agreed them, I'm sure those people who are going to deliver on them will be making preparations and in fact spending some of their own money in bringing those preparations for delivery forward. And we need a very quick answer on as far, well, the one that I'm concerned about, and I'm sure it applies to the rest.
Good question, Rhiannon.
Yeah, I think this is our frustration, the fact that we didn't know this process when we've started taking these funding decisions in September and October. We've been encouraged by government to progress very quickly on those projects, and now we've got this additional hurdle of needing to formally agree some of these changes. I think it was always expected we need to agree substantial changes, and that was set out in the grant offer letters, but actually the shift in focus on the jobs is something completely new, and I think we need to clearly raise this through our annual performance review with government and their shift of the goalposts there. I'm just trying to assure you we are trying to work this through as quickly as possible. So I'm expecting meetings to take place on Monday to try and agree this with central government. Obviously we'll have to work to their timescales, but we will push them as much as we can to get these changes agreed.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Simon.
A couple of things on that then. So first and foremost, then, if the shift is on jobs, I guess we need to consider that when we're approving anything later on anyway, don't we? Regardless of whether we like it or not, that's going to be a focus we've got to think about. What can we actually decide then? It sounds to me like we've got power with one hand to make some decisions, but actually it's irrelevant because government are going to do whatever they want in this particular case. Is it really just a list of priorities more than it is what we approve?
So I think you're right. If government are focusing on the jobs particularly, they have said, I mean, officers have said that they'll give consideration to the LEP's view on this, and the fact that the LEP and the Accountability Board are satisfied with these projects. I think that will factor very strongly in their consideration of these projects. So part of the exercise here today is just to make you aware of these changes to the outputs and outcomes, so we can be comfortable ourselves and strongly push government that we are comfortable, and therefore we strongly encourage them to also be comfortable with these projects.
So sorry, Chair, one more question then to follow that up then. This may be silly, but I don't know the working mechanisms behind it, but if we find that second tranche is at threat and we don't get that money, and there are projects that have already then started, and like Rodney said, they've already committed spend which don't have a turnaround, how much of that are we able to at a later date switch from the underspend in LGF? Are we able to? Can we? Is that a consideration, or do we just need to park that away and it's not even possible?
I think we'd have to bring some options back to the board. I don't think there's anything in the grant conditions that would fully stop us from doing that, but I just want to work through the detail. can I take an action that we'll bring that back to the board in February to consider, particularly when we know how much LGF might potentially be unallocated at that point. I don't think we'd have unallocated funding to the full value of the 42.5 million that would be short. So I think there will still be a risk there, but you know, perhaps project in train, that might be part of the mitigation, perhaps.
Thank you. Okay, so we are going to now go to the detail of projects in a minute, but this is the overview. So do we agree the updated total planned GBF spend of 29.687 million GBF in 2020-21? Can I see your hands, please, if you agree? Thank you. Okay, so move on now to item 14, which is getting building funds with those projects that have a high degree of certainty. Kate.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this report covers 12 projects that are requesting GBF funding and have been assessed by the independent technical evaluator as offering a high value for money with a high level of certainty. The total funding ask for these 12 projects is £48,636,190. £33,773,898 of that is not due to be spent until 21-22, and therefore is at risk until confirmation from sectoral government for the second tranche of funding has been received by the CELEP. The majority of the projects in this report have reported changes in the outcomes from the original submission to government made in July. Approval of the GBF funding allocation by the accountable body for these projects is therefore subject to agreement with central government that they are happy to accept these changes. Two projects, Harlow Library and Harlow College, at the time of the report being completed, had not had all of the funding sources confirmed. Both projects have now confirmed their full funding packages as of the 19th of November. The report states that the Swan Modular Housing Project has 4 risks to the project proceeding that are currently being mitigated, and the Accountability Board approval was subject to the receipt of written confirmation being provided by the scheme promoter that these have been mitigated. This was originally required by the 30th of November 2020. At the point of this board, 2 of those risks have been mitigated. As these risks relate to decisions by government departments outside of the project's immediate control, and this project has also been recommended by the ITE as a strong project, it is suggested that the board take on the recommendation that this should be updated and that written confirmation must be provided and that all conditions have been met before funding is transferred. An update will be provided to the board in the February 2021 Accountability Board, and if all of the conditions have not been met, the GBF allocation will be considered for reallocation. I'm happy to pass this over to Steer so that they can have bring forward what their assessment was for these projects, and then I can help answer any queries after that point.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much. All of the schemes under item 14 have been assessed through the independent technical evaluator process as being reasonable and robust, and that risk is sufficiently managed. So in terms of reasonableness, we mean that the right analysis has been conducted in line with government guidance and proportionally. When I say robust, we mean that the analysis that has been conducted correctly with good data and assumptions. And with respect to risk, through the analysis and a range of uncertainty, risk has been removed, or outstanding key risks have been suitably mitigated, or proposals for mitigation are suitable. Thank you.
Thank you. So, comment. Kate, were you going to say anything more, or?
No, sorry.
No. Okay, thank you. Comments, queries from the board? None? Just to note that I have requested from the Secretariat going forwards that the changes in the outcomes be noted in the detail of the reports rather than in the tables, because I think it would just be quite be a lot easier to kind of note that way going forward. So that will be changed in the future. Okay, so unless there are any queries from anybody or comments, we go through to decision, which is, do we approve the award of a total of 48.6363190 GBF to the following 12 projects which have been assessed as offering high value for money with high certainty of achieving this, and this is the change to the wording, subject to government agreeing any changes to project outcomes identified for these projects. And the projects are Enterprise Centre for Horizon at 120 Business Park, Harlow Library, Essex, subject to the full funding package being confirmed by, sorry, I just wanted to query this. I think, Kate, you said February, but on my papers it says the 9th of November 2020.
No, Harlow Library and Harlow College have both had their funding sources confirmed as of yesterday at this point. So both of those projects have now received their full funding packages confirmed.
Okay, so Harlow Library, Essex, and I don't need to put that caveat in it. Harlow College, Essex. Swan Modular Housing Factory, Essex, subject to written confirmation being provided by the scheme promoter to confirm that the 4 risks to the project's proceeding have been mitigated. If written confirmation has not been provided by the 30th of November, or is it February, Rhiannon?
No, that's the February update.
By the February date exactly, sorry?
The 12th of February accountability.
By the 12th of February, the GBF will be automatically reallocated to the next project on the GBF pipeline. UTC Maritime Sustainable Technology Hub East Sussex, 1st and 2nd floors, Building 500 Discovery Park, Sandwich, Kent, Javelin Way Development, Kent, new performing and production digital arts facility at North Kent College, Kent, Romney Marsh Employment Hub, Kent, Thanet Parkway Railway Station, Kent, the Meeting Place, Swanley, Kent, and Transport and Logistics Institute, Thurrock. Do we approve that? Can I see your hands if you approve? Thank you. And note that the award of the GBF funding to the 12 projects is subject to sufficient GBF being received by CELEP from central government in 21-22. Thank you. Okay, so let's move now to item 15, which is getting building fund high value for money, lower value. Rhiannon.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So yeah, here we're approving another 7 projects to the value of 4.789, getting building fund. Again, these will be subject to government agreeing the changes to outputs and outcomes for any projects which have shown that change. For this, again, there's a risk around £1.92 million being spent in next financial year. So whilst the majority of the spend that we're approving here is this year, there is that risk to the second tranche. In terms of the lower certainty here, so these are smaller scale projects. What we're trying to do is make sure that if they're asking for less funding in our assurance framework, we set out that actually we'll follow a proportionate approach, which means that if you're asking for 100,000, you're not undertaking as much economic appraisal as you would be for £10 million. So the lower certainty reflects the fact that these are all projects that are under the value of £2 million, and therefore either a BCR is being calculated at benefit cost ratio, it's been calculated, but it hasn't quite met the 2-to-1 threshold. But if they've done additional work, we expect it would have done, or they've applied a more qualitative approach to their assessment of the benefits within their business case. They have all been assessed by the ITE, and I'll hand over to Steer to present their assessment.
Thank you, Rhiannon. I was going to say what you've just said, which is that all 7 of these schemes through our assessment meet the criteria for the exemption within the LEPS assurance framework. That is, that if they do not present high value for money, that is a benefit cost ratio of over 2 to 1, but have a benefit cost ratio either more than 1.5 to 1, or where the project benefits are notoriously difficult to appraise in monetary terms, then the following conditions must be satisfied. That is, the project must be seeking less than £2 million worth of funding from the LEP, and to conduct further quantified or monetised economic appraisal would be disproportionate, where there is an overwhelming strategic case with minimal risks in the other 4 cases of the business case, and that were the qualitative benefits monetised, they would most likely increase the benefit cost ratio above 2 to 1. It's our view that all 7 of these schemes meet those criteria. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So, comments, queries on any of these projects? I can see none. Okay. Thank you. So we move swiftly then forwards, which is about whether we approve the award of a total of 4.789 million GBF to the following 7 projects, which have been assessed as offering high value for money with medium/low certainty of achieving this. And the change to the wording on your papers is subject to government agreeing any changes to project outcomes identified for these projects. And the projects are Charleston Access Road, East Sussex, Tyndall Square, Chelmsford, South Essex No Use Empty, Sussex Innovation Farmer COVID Secure Adaptations, Creative Hub 4 Fisher Street, Lewes, Nexus Harlow, Labworth Car Park, Canvey Island Modernisation. Do you approve? I see your hands if you do. Thank you. Okay. And the next item is agree that once No Use Empty project has been completed, a decision must be brought back to the board to agree how any GBF held by Southend Borough Council in relation to the project should be spent.
I'm happy with that, Sarah.
Okay, thank you. Do we agree? Do we all agree that then? I see your hands, please. Thank you. And then note that the award of GBF funding to the 7 projects is subject to sufficient GBF being received by CELEPS from central government in 21-22. Thank you. Okay, so now we will move to item 16, which is getting building fund, high value for money, medium certainty. Thank you, Howard.
Thank you, Chair. So on this report, we're considering the award of £13,672,500 of Getting Building Fund to 6 projects which have been assessed as offering high value for money with medium certainty of achieving this. And this is because the projects do not have, for example, planning permission, or they exhibit a benefit cost ratio that may be sensitive to a downside risk or for another reason. So of the total award of £13,672,500 for these projects, £7,433,527 of this is not due to be spent until 21-22, and therefore is at risk until confirmation from central government for the 2021-22 funding has been received by CELEP. Within the report, we're showing 4 of the 6 projects are recommended subject to the changes, outputs and outcomes being agreed with central government. Through the baseline exercise referred to under the previous agenda items, a change to outcomes has also now been reported for Better Queensway and for Riding Sunbeams. It is therefore recommended that the funding award to all 6 projects concluded in this report is subject to the change being agreed with central government. Further details on these projects are set out in Appendix B, and changes to the project outcomes are set out in Appendix E. So that's all from me, and I'll hand over to Steer for their comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. I'll briefly go through some comments on each of the 6 schemes in turn. The first being Better Queensway, and that's awaiting a planning decision, we understand, in February of next year. So that scheme is subject to planning. The second is Jaywick Market, the development of a market and commercial space, also subject to planning. The third, Rochway, the development of independent living community. This is subject to a delivery partner being brought on board. The fourth, which is the Modus building at Harlow Science Park, that has a BCR around 2 to 1. So as Howard mentioned, it would be subject to any downside risk, bringing it from a high value for money category into a medium value for money. Similarly with tendering bikes and cycling infrastructure, the BCR is relatively low. I mean, it's high BCR, but it's only just within the high category. And finally, riding sunbeams. This is a scheme looking at providing solar panelled energy for railway propulsion. And the benefits are forecast over 5 years. Now, the first 4 years of the scheme would be operating as a pilot with Network Rail, but that could be subject to competition. And therefore, if the scheme promoter were not successful within that competition, the fifth year's worth of benefits might not be realised. But it is still our assessment that all of these schemes present high value for money.
Thank you, Steve. Do I have any comments or queries on any of these projects? Simon.
So, Stephen, I think you just answered that with the Riding Sunbeams project. It was the one out of all of the projects I've seen, that one struck out the most as one that probably was disadvantaged by our process and our scoring process, but is actually a really innovative project that would look really good to see the evidence and the impact of that, that could have wider, far-reaching benefits. So it was really that fifth year, was it, that really got in the way of it showing really good value for money, was it?
Thank you. The question wasn't about value for money, it was about the risk of the value for money being realised or our certainty. Network Rail have only committed to a short lease contract of 2 to 4 years on this scheme, so the fifth year of benefits might not accrue. That would be subject to further competition.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I can see no further hands, so I will move on. So we need to note the risk to the value for money and outcomes offered by the Riding Sunbeams project due to the issues set out in section 4.11 of this report. That's noted. And approve the award. Do we approve the award of the total of £13,672,500 GBF to the following 5 projects which have been assessed as offering high value for money with medium certainty of achieving this, subject to government agreeing any changes to project outcomes identified for these projects? And the projects are Better Queensway Opportunity South Essex, subject to written confirmation from Southend Borough Council that planning permission has been granted by the 31st of March 2021. The board will be asked to agree that the GBF will be reallocated to the next project on the GBF pipeline at the first board meeting on 2021-22. Jaywick Market and Commercial Space Essex, Rocheway Independent Living Essex, Modus Essex, Tendering Bikes and Cycle Infrastructure Essex, and Riding Sunbeams Solar Railways East Sussex. Do you approve?
Agree.
Okay, thank you. And do you agree that if the planning consent for the Jaywick Market and Commercial Space project has not been successfully secured for the project by the end of Q1 2021-22, the GBF must be returned to SELUP in full for reallocation to the next project on the GBF pipeline?
Agree.
Do you agree?
Just on that, Chair, if I may, as everyone knows, Jaywick is, I think, the most or the challenged ward in the whole of the UK, and I would just really think I think it's really important that we do something there if we can. So I would just put a plea in to see if we can, if something happens there, to see if we can do something in the area, because it's having been there several times, I'm desperate to do something there if we can.
Thank you, Chris.
Just for your support.
Thank you. Councillor Woodley.
Just to say, I love Jaywick. I spent my childhood holidays there, and it's a fantastic place. really does need a lot of attention, and it could be a fantastic place to live. So, yeah, I love Jaywick. Maybe I should write that somewhere on there. Yeah.
Thank you. Noted. Okay, so note that the award of the GBF funding to the 6th project is subject to sufficient GBF being received by CELEP from central government in 2021-22. Thank you. Okay, so now we are going to move on to the confidential item number 7 in your agenda pack. Please, Suzanne, could you sort out the process?
Okay, of course. So please, for all attendees, unless you are an employee of one of the 6 upper tier authorities, please, can you now leave the meeting? Give us a couple of minutes and then you'll be able to re-register, go back through your registration link and be held in a waiting room. But please, can I ask you all to leave now? Webinar and restart the recording. Thank you.
Yep, I can confirm it's now open and the recording is restarted.
Okay, so if we could just give a couple of seconds, just in case there are people that are going to rejoin, it just takes a couple of seconds for them to come back through.
Just also, so for your information, Chris Brody won't be rejoining this bit of the meeting. He's had to go to another meeting, just so you know.
So just bear with us a moment. We may have lost people for good, given the long running time of the meeting. So we'll just give them a couple of minutes just to see if they're coming back or if they've headed off for lunch. Okay, so I think we are back. We've had someone come back on. We are recording again and it will be available. So I think we are ready to go again, Chair, whenever you are.
Thank you, Suzanne. So we are asked to note the latest position on the delivery of the project. And we are asked whether we agree that the board will be provided with a further update on the project at its meeting on the 12th of February 2021. Do we agree? Can I see your hands if you do? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so the date of the next meeting is the 12th of February 2020. Is there any other urgent business? Nope. Obviously, you will have noted items 19 to 22, which were some confidential items. So just, I hope you noted those when we were considering that report. And I just want to check that there is no urgent exempt business. No. Okay, so with a few minutes to spare, thank you very much for all your contributions and for all your help. And I'd like to pay particular tribute to all of both the Secretariat and actually all of the local authority officers who've had to work so incredibly hard to get all of these projects in a position to be able to go forwards to today's meeting. So huge thank you to them. It really is an incredible amount of work. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you at the CELEP's strategic board meeting, but at the next accountability board meeting on the 12th of February. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sarah, bye everybody.
Thanks everybody.